Welcome to Diagnosing Health Care, a podcast featuring thought-provoking conversations about the latest legal, policy, and regulatory issues in healthcare. While these issues may seem like hurdles, we'll also look at the business opportunities and solutions that exist. Diagnosing Healthcare is brought to you by the healthcare lawyers at Epstein Becker Green, a leading law firm that has more than 40 years' experience serving clients in the healthcare industry nationwide.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Diagnosing Healthcare. I'm your host, Tim Murphy, an attorney in Epstein Becker Green's Healthcare and Life Sciences practice, based out of our Boston and Washington, D.C. offices. On today's episode, we will be discussing a growing investment and general market trend, the growth of physician practices accepting risk-based payments from health plans. We are going to focus on what makes these practices attractive to investors and what health regulatory considerations investors should think about when they are evaluating investment opportunities in these practices. Joining me for today's discussion is Jason Madden, Managing Director of Accordion, as well as EBG attorneys Jason Christ and Josh Freemire, partners in our Washington, D.C. and Baltimore offices. Jason, Josh, and Jason, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining us. I wanted to give each of you a moment to introduce yourselves.
Josh Freemire, like you mentioned, I'm in the Baltimore office. I've been a health regulatory attorney for about 15 years, primarily representing private equity sponsors as well as their portfolio companies in a variety of settings.
And this is Jason Christ. I concentrate my practice on counseling and defending entities on fraud and abuse matters, primarily. I do a lot of my work, especially with respect to Medicare Advantage, ACA, risk adjustment payment.
My name is Jason Madden. I'm a managing director with Accordion Partners. Very grateful for the invitation to speak with Jason and Josh on this podcast. A little background on Accordion. Our focus, our purpose is to enable portfolio companies to thrive under the scrutiny of institutional ownership. And we do that by advising the office of the CFO. We do that through 4 verticals: an FP&A vertical, an accounting vertical, a team focused on transaction execution, and a team focused on performance improvement, which includes turnaround and restructuring. And I sit in the FP&A vertical, and our primary focus is helping CFOs answer the tough business questions of sponsors with good business answers. And usually behind that is data question, data answer. And we have a robust team of professionals focused on healthcare. We work across the full spectrum of healthcare: payer, provider, pharma, services, life sciences, et cetera. A lot of activity in that space. That's a significant portion of our overall business and growing. So it's good to be here.
Thanks, Jason. And I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you for joining us in general. We're always happy to have non-attorneys join us on these podcasts so that we can broaden the scope of what we get to discuss. But to start the discussion today, I thought it would be useful for our listeners for us to briefly describe what we mean when we describe physician practices that are accepting risk-based payments. Josh, could you just explain to the listeners the sort of scope of what we're talking about?
Sure. And the structures involved are pretty wide ranging. They go beyond what folks may traditionally think of, and this is the exception of capitated payments from health plans. Risk-bearing, when we talk about risk-bearing organizations, we're really talking about practices or entities that are going to participate in both the upside and the downside regarding quality of care and outcome-based payments. There's lots of different ways to structure that. It can be limited to certain services. It can be expansive across the entire need of a certain patient population. But most importantly, it's going to make the practice or the entity responsible for the cost of care, including care not provided by that entity. So it goes out beyond what's provided by the provider group itself. So that's kind of the important part of the structure, or understanding it. And maybe the Jasons can chime in here and add some more detail that I may be missing.
Thanks, Josh. I think you did grab it all. But we've seen a growth in these types of practices over the last half decade or so. I was wondering if you might be able, Jason, to describe what makes a practice successful and what makes them fail, and why are we seeing growth now in this industry?
Sure. So this is Jason Christ. I think there's a number of factors that have sort of caused us to grow, especially in comparing from past decades where we didn't see as much growth. I mean, first and foremost, the growth of Medicare Advantage and managed Medicaid is a really significant driver of growth of the practices that serve that population. Medicare Advantage alone is about a third of all Medicare spend. It's $233 billion annually, roughly. And, as those Medicare Advantage markets grow, the need for health plans to manage costs has grown with it. And so that's sort of a natural outgrowth of that. But I think the other idea here, and this isn't mutually exclusive from the idea of Medicare Advantage growth, is the advent of risk-adjusted payments. Medicare Advantage was impossible or impracticable in a lot of localities and geographies because you couldn't have stable premiums. Plans could be subject to adverse selection. Providers who were taking risk, capitated or otherwise, could be adversely selected and could have uncontrolled medical spend. And so you didn't see a whole lot of real risk taking at the provider level, except for, sort of the more fully integrated models. But now that you have risk adjustment, you can stabilize your premiums because you are in fact paid based on the acuity and the, anticipated medical spend of that population. So that's really that regulatory scheme, that payment scheme has really kind of paved the way for these to grow.
And Jason Madden, I was hoping you might be able to talk a little bit about sort of the operational considerations for what makes a successful practice.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. So from where we sit, right, and a lot of our work is usually post-close, but obviously the issues that need to be solved post-close are surfaced pre-close, but in the diligence process. But more broadly speaking, in terms of the overall thesis, one, the concept of capitation isn't new. Once upon a time, it was capitation to manage costs. Now it's capitation to help incentivize outcome, which has a heavier focus. And in order to do that effectively, there needs to be probably two key considerations that need to be in place in order to enable success. Right, one is the scale of the business. You need a broad enough population size, both for risk management purposes to kind of de-risk any surprises, medical surprises, as well as technology tools that might enable transparency needed to also manage similar surprises. Some of them are just common interoperability challenges that exist in fee-for-service as well as RBOs, but is also the ability to understand end-to-end care longitudinally. Is the ease of being able to do that is growing. It's ever growing. And that is another reason why this is more feasible than it might originally have been many years ago. Activating this as a tool for cost management and driving outcomes, it's leverageable due to technology. But on the flip side of that is success is not a layup. The risk management is still real, making sure that proactive medical care is administered in order to help both mitigate surprises in medical costs and medical expenses. And just, overall making sure that patients are getting the care that they need versus something a little bit more superficial, wellness checkups that are, shorter than need to be. The risk is still there, but appreciation and ability to kind of manage that has improved greatly over time.
We were talking a little bit about this before we got on here today, Jason, but would you agree that the same sort of structures that are driving the recent interest in physician practice management, kind of roll-ups and increased sophistication with large physician groups, where there's better physician alignment, better compliance structures, better use of technology, sort of putting a finer point on the efficiencies that make a good practice run, whether it be a fee-for-service or a capitated practice? A lot of those same trends are also contributing to the resurgence of interest in this risk-bearing type organization, where if you have a large practice, they're already doing those things well. They're incorporating technology. They're aligning physicians. They understand end-to-end care. They understand the payment flow. They understand the point of view of the insurers. They're well suited to take the next step into accepting risk and sort of expanding their sophistication and ultimately broadening the bottom line.
Yeah, I'm actually coming with you on that. And I think in many ways, what's going on here in this model is providers having to think like payers, right? And the tools to do that, it's one thing to just think like a payer, but the ability to execute on a more sophisticated, larger scale approach, it wasn't there the same way it is in the last few years. Putting information at the fingertips of providers, either at the practice level or at the individual provider level, enables them to think in a more sophisticated manner about delivery of care and cost impact over time. So I do think that transfer of risk over to the decision maker and converting a little bit more of a split thinking within the mind of the provider-payer type mentality is becoming more and more achievable in an effective way because of the tools that are now available across the space.
Yeah, and I think, Jason, building on what you said, the sort of culture really has to be all in on this. Physician alignment is absolutely critical. You have to have buy-in. Thinking like a health plan, I think, is a good way to sort of describe that shift in mentality where fee-for-service revenues are based on volume and to some extent value, whereas, the real money here is made by the up and down side of managing that population more globally. And so if you're looking at an entity, the leadership team that runs a fee-for-service MSO might be a very good leadership team, but they aren't a guaranteed good fit for a risk-bearing entity. The extent to which technology has been adopted is consistent, uniform across the enterprise is very critical as well, because so much of managing this population is, I think, Jason, what you alluded to, and Josh, which is that patient engagement side of things. If you're a fee-for-service provider that has attributed your success to number of visits and medical spend, it's the exact opposite of that, except the extent to which you really need to be proactive with patients, do outreach, do calls, because so much of your payment is based on the acuity of the population and the diagnostic codes in the patients. If you don't have those encounters, you don't get paid.
If you're on a capitated basis, you can try and cheat things by providing less care or putting up barriers to care. All that's bad and frequently illegal. But here, if all you're getting is the upside from good outcomes, you really need to drive those outcomes. And if you just limit care, that's not going to be effective at getting you there. And if you push too much diagnostics, you're going to be spending money unnecessarily. Again, that's not going to necessarily get you to better care. So you really have to focus and have a provider, not just a provider team, but a management team. And this is where I think a lot of my clients come into play, where they're very good managers, first and foremost. So, they're interested in this structure because it's going to reward excellent managers who come in with an understanding of the program payment system end to end, and can drive excellent medical management, excellent outcome derivation. So they can create a better outcome. They can drive the bottom line. And we don't see any of that kind of cheating around the edges. It's just not successful in this model.
Is that the answer, Josh, to why this is attracting investment currently? Is it that combination of skilled leadership and resources that can provide the technology that both Jason Christ and Jason Madden were referring to or referencing as really necessary to be able to monitor and drive that care?
It's a great fit for investors who are bringing to the table a sophisticated understanding of payment systems and automation, coding, technology, population management, statistics, all of those things that private equity sponsors frequently are going to bring to the table when coupled with the institutional clinical expertise that's already at practices. So that makes it an excellent fit to really drive efficiencies and avoid what I think are downfalls that you see, not just here, but also in the PPM space, where practices maybe get very acquisitive. They bring on additional practices, additional physicians. They aren't necessarily aligned. They don't have the sophisticated understanding of either the model's goals or the levers that you need to pull to make it work effectively. So you get bigger, but you get less efficient as you get bigger. And I think that's one of the things that has changed historically speaking with this model is folks are better now at managing it. The technological tools are better. And really investors are very interested in that kind of cutting edge where they can bring their expertise to help lever a business that already has clinical expertise. We'll add our business and statistical and technological expertise. We'll move you to the next level, make you a different kind of business, and we'll all benefit greatly as a result, including the patients, which is always important.
That dovetails really nicely into my next question for Jason Madden. And that's when you're conducting diligence and I know that you spend a lot of time supporting portfolio companies post-investment as well. What are the operational factors that drive investment success here? What are you looking for and what are you watching out for to make sure you're not seeing?
Yeah, I'll answer that, but I'll just sort of quick piggyback on what Josh was just saying. In addition to some of the tools that are now more advanced, the mentality shifts. It enables a doctor to be a doctor and not a business person, right? The whole point of CPOM is to kind of separate that mentality and those activities. Providers are not out recruiting patients, right? That's been shifted over to a different team. They're focused solely on delivering care for the purpose of better outcome, not for the purpose of better margin. And I think that's a critical point. That's why they went to medical school. That's why they do what they do. That's why that's why they want to do it. And that's enabling everybody to kind of focus on what they do best, kind of a win-win across the team from a skill set perspective and a mission. In terms of what we see in a risk-bearing organization, it's kind of a common theme. When we are called in to help professionalize a business or a practice, there's a financial aspect and the operational aspect. In our work, how does this matter to an RBO? You want to understand the operational drivers behind that. I think we're kind of at the forefront of enabling practices to both understand what financial results, what are the changes in their financial results, what are the opportunities for growth, what are the risks to their growth. In the case of an RBO, it's understanding service fund, flow of funds around the service funds and cost outside the four walls. And can those be aggregated to help provide insight to leadership at an RBO for purposes of risk management? I think that we're in the early stages of that, quite frankly. Use a lot of different information inside and outside the practice and making sure that you have an integrated data asset to help them understand the business side of it. You can't separate the two, quite frankly, in this case, because data is both clinical and financial, right, in nature, right? And just making sure that there's some alignment between two. And that's our primary purpose in that regards, is helping business leaders get good answers to their business questions, and behind that are data questions and data answers. So that's a longer answer, but it's the same thing in risk-bearing organizations. You have a whole different group of information sources, and can they be aggregated to help provide better insight into the business?
And from the regulatory standpoint, when you're evaluating a risk-bearing provider, from a diligence standpoint, I mean, as a general matter, I think you start with where are they in terms of their evolution? Are they highly sophisticated, or are they more a well-run nucleus with a number of different practices that were add-ons? Because the way you evaluate them is often very different. You tend to find that there are the beginnings of the institution that had its tenure longer with providing risk-bearing services for population management, for populations. They tend to be very well run at that point. But you always sort of have to start off with the thesis that, physicians are not by nature expert coders. Typically are good with CPT and evaluation management codes. But when you're managing a population, you're doing that under a Medicare Advantage contract or managed Medicaid or other, you're looking at a different code set, and that's the ICD codes, the international codes, and that there's 70,000 plus codes. Physicians aren't, as a general matter, very good at that unless they've been educated or have taken the time to learn that. And there's just dozens of codes for, frankly, the same disease. Those are the codes now that drive payment. It's not the E&M and CPT codes. And so that's an enormous shift. And so obviously diligencing the degree to which they have that education, training, and accuracy is important for two reasons. First of all, it's driving payment. And if you're underdiagnosing conditions, that's a significant drag on the bottom line. Second, and perhaps more importantly, you have the fraud and abuse risk associated with the False Claims Act and the submission of unsupported codes. Recent remarks from the Deputy AAG, Michael Granston, back in December, noted that risk adjustment, both for plans and for providers, is an important priority for DOJ, discussed a number of investigations, cases, and matters that they're handling. So it is a very significant risk for risk-bearing entities. Specifically, there's a number of vendors that have been used by risk-bearing entities and plans with regard to risk adjustment activities that sort of happen outside of the office, in-home assessments, retrospective review, things like that. DOJ and whistleblowers are very keyed into those activities. And so those are other areas that we would look at during a diligence.
Well, and it's important to note it's a developing area too, right? So I don't want to leave aside thinking about for a minute in terms of diligence, just sort of standard physician practice risks that are going to go along with it, right? So corporate practice, financial relationships, especially if you have a hybrid entity that's only taking risk in certain populations or certain parts of the group, or is otherwise still performing a fee-for-service practice, you leave yourself open to fraud and abuse scenarios that may not trigger an issue when you're fully risk dependent. But when you're not, when you're fee for service, at least in part, you still have vulnerability under those. So you can't completely leave that off to the side and forget about it. But I think it's important to remember that this whole kind of risk adjustment area, in terms of fraud and abuse, in terms of enforcement risk, in terms of thinking about how to box it for diligences and how to think about liabilities there, it's all developing. So if you have someone who is kind of on the bleeding edge of some kind of coding practice, so they're doing something that's allowing them to code at a much higher level across their population, that may not be strictly prohibited right now. It may not be illegal, but we may be headed in a direction where that becomes suspect, that becomes the focus of an investigation, that becomes a headache for the providers at some point farther down the line. So I know, Jason, you've seen a little bit of that kind of develop over the years, and I think it's still in development, right?
It absolutely is. This is new cases, maybe since 2005 forward. There's only been a couple, frankly. But your comment is well taken. I mean, the sophistication of your diligence has to sort of largely track with the sophistication of the entity. Being able to hopefully spot problematic practices, outlier physicians, or trends in a given population at that pre-acquisition is important. But equally important is once you've now invested and are vested in the company, how is management and leadership being equipped from a governance and compliance standpoint to make sure that as this area continues to evolve and change sort of in real time, that the company is sort of ready and has the necessary resources to meet that?
And Jason Madden, that goes to your points a little bit, I think, about what are the tools that are at the fingertips of management in terms of, monitoring, in terms of dashboards, in terms of otherwise kind of understanding the levers that are out there and how they're being pulled. That'll help you check for physician alignment. That'll help you check for outlier physicians or particularly problematic practices or areas. And it'll help you look at onboarded tuck-ins or add-ons later on. How are they going to integrate with the existing system? Do you agree with that?
Great. Totally, Josh. In fact, that's a lot of what we see. We work with practices with varying degrees of sophistication within the MSO. We want to support them and advise them, or meet them where they're at. But sometimes we have to tell them that they'll need to upgrade certain skill sets, right, in order to support the business at the level that it would need to be supported to achieve the value creation initiatives of the sponsor. And those can't be compromised on. And the same way you wouldn't compromise on delivery of care. That actually appears on the MSO side. Are we supporting the business or managing the business to the level that we can? One of the things that I think about, I think we talked about this, if a hurricane's coming towards Florida, Walmart can tell you where they're going to sell the most strawberry Pop-Tarts, but the medical practices might be a little bit more in the dark around how that might impact medical expenses, particularly because they just don't have the same scale. And there's a little bit more fragmentation there. But having people in place who can help measure the business and democratize the data in a way that enables data-driven decisions, right? That's more and more critical for a situation like this. In this case, it's probably more at the payer level, but there are also provider level and site level decisions or analytics as well that can be introduced to see if there are patterns within sites or providers where the surprise on the medical expense side is more frequent than others. And that's just about having, well warehoused data, through the EMR, ideally an EDW creation, high integrity, well-governed data set that gets easily translated into storytelling through data dashboards for management that drives that and makes it a lot easier to offset those risks.
Well, and it sounds like the larger the population, the larger the geographic spread of the practices, the more of an accurate picture you can develop from the data in terms of predictive cost slotting, right? Like guessing where that's going to come out.
In theory, yes. So when we go into work with the practice, we look for three things. There's reality, right? If you stood outside a practice and counted visits with a clicker, you'd get a number, right? But then you have to make sure that the applications track it, that it's warehoused properly or consistently, that it's accessible. There's no EMR blocking, and that no one's going to cry PHI and prevent you from understanding that. And then even sometimes when you're the client of the vendor, you don't always get the access you'd like or the information you'd like, and then making sure that the structure's there. Otherwise, it's harder for your average finance or accounting professional kind of access that information and tell that story to people who might be able to make, create leading indicators that might prevent some surprises on the medical expense side. Is that what you're getting at, Josh?
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, right? And it goes towards a concern that I have, that we see a lot of growth, and I've certainly seen this in the physician practice space, where you see what I call the sort of duct tape structures, right? Where they go out, they start with one platform. That's a very aligned platform. Everybody understands the goals there. Then they buy up another dozen practices. They kind of tape them all together. They're all on different systems. They have disparate management structures, and they can come to somebody else and say, listen, we've got 500 doctors. And they do sort of, right? I mean, but they're not really on the same system. You really have a serious problem trying to be that acquisitive that quickly and maintain alignment and maintain the technological visibility that you need in order to do the population management that you need to do.
Yeah. And you live and die by your data in this environment. And your risk is your population, your members, your panel is really being driven by your contracts with Medicare Advantage and other large insurers in a given market very often. So if you don't have that alignment, plans are tremendous consumers of data. They have to submit a lot of data to state Medicaid agencies. The Affordable Care Act markets are risk adjusted. CMS requires encounter data and other types of data. So the provider has to be willing and able and very good at providing that data in a timely fashion. And so you do risk, and this is another thing you would look at in a diligence, contract disruptions, obviously materially affecting your business. You may have a few large contracts that are, substantially all of the membership for a given provider. And if you have that duct tape structure and you have grown too quickly, you do run the risk of not only regulatory risk, but also contract risk with payers. And the other thing to look at, which you wouldn't normally necessarily focus on if you're diligencing an MSO, is what's in those contracts. Are there hidden payment provisions we have to be worried about? Because, substantially all the payments coming from an 80% PMPM, for example, on a given population. And so most of your money is flowing through these contracts. There are audits. RADV is a good example of a CMS audit that could have tremendous liability for health plans. And there's a question of whether health plans are going to try to move that risk down to the providers who may not be, sort of attuned to that. In addition to sort of monitoring your data, you really have to look at those contracts as well.
And actually, I would say, Jason, Chris, to kind of piggyback on that anecdotally, you get the data from the payers, right? Obviously, payer specific data, right? But the skill set and the savvy to be able to kind of create, say you have like siloed data, right? Payer one sends you a file, payer two sends you a set of facts or data sets. But you might, if you were to look at that like more horizontally or kind of create an intersection within that, where you find out that within each payer, there's leakage, but across those payers, it's because of the same provider or the same site. They could be taking a little bit more of a proactive approach to patient care. And then all of a sudden, it doesn't look like 10 problems across 10 payers, but one problem across 10 payers. It's the same region or site that could be doing a better job about managing the risk and being able to package that up and tell that story, in a clean, reliable way to the business leaders within the practice. What could be wrong with that? That could only benefit everybody, including the patients.
I think that's one of the best parts about this model is if everything is working together, in theory, everyone should win, right? The patient should win. There should be better care. The physician should take home more, and the investor should take home a profit on their investment as well. It's really, we don't often see it in healthcare, but it's potentially a win-win-win model. And the payer, the payer is going to see a reduction in costs, hopefully, through this model too. And
a reduction in administration expenses.
Right. If everything is working in concert together. One of the items that came up in the back and forth that I did want to highlight was the risk around rolling in new practices or changing a practice from a fee-for-service model into this risk-based model. And there's some particular risk with those split practices that are moving from the traditional model into the risk-based model. And that practice is beyond sort of those risks are beyond what Josh talked about when he was talking about traditional False Claims Act risks and corporate practice and medicine risks that you always have to have in mind. There are actually risks with the actual movement of patients from one model to another in terms of what practices are allowed to do and say to patients. And this is something that sometimes comes up for these types of practices. I was hoping, Jason, you might be able to touch quickly upon what those risks are and how patients can move from one model to another.
It's not easy. Change is hard. If your patient census, if your panel is primarily fee for service and we'll say Medicare Part B, if the goal of the organization is to really just serve that population for which the provider is at risk, it is difficult to move that same patient base sort of over. There's no good answer. There's no silver bullet in how you do that. And in fact, there are some restrictions. For example, the Medicare marketing rules come into play when a provider is receiving remuneration or even some instances when it's not, but is actively marketing one health plan over another health plan. So it's not as easy as it may seem. There's always risk when you're converting from fee for service practice over to a Medicare C practice that frankly, you'll just lose your patients. Again, the regulatory scheme doesn't sort of make that much easier.
And the other, as we sort of draw to a close here, the other thing that I wanted to point out for the listeners that we look at in diligence, and that is an important thing to consider in diligence, is that when you enter into this risk-based organization space, you are not just regulated by the traditional healthcare bodies. There are oftentimes insurance licenses that are involved, depending on which jurisdiction you're operating in and the amount of risk you're taking and the form of the risk that you're taking. So it is a whole new animal for practices to also consider and for investors to consider as they enter into the space. Additional requirements, additional capital that might be required to have on the books, and additional licenses that might be required.
And it's all state specific, Tim. It's worth noting there too, right? There's not a national insurance license scheme out there. So it's going to be very state specific, and it's going to be very contract specific. So a lot of times, again, if you're dealing with providers whose expertise is on the clinical side, they may not even truly understand what they are taking on in terms of insurance risk. What is considered insurance risk by the State Department of Insurance in, Kentucky, right? They may not know the answer to that question. So they may be operating without appropriate licenses because they don't even know that they need them.
And sort of the final step in the evolution of some of these large practices is to really become a delegated entity and not just be financially responsible for facility treatment, but also to make a lot of those treatment decisions and take on a delegated function like utilization management. And so that's a whole other level of compliance and governance and oversight. And if they are a delegated entity, and if the provider doesn't have adequate resources or licensed personnel to make treatment decisions, adverse benefit decisions can immediately trigger an appeals process, an administrative law process, denying care, unlawfully failing to deal with denials, grievances, complaints. I mean, all of that, and credentialing, frankly, all of that can trigger regulatory risk and also contract risk. And so if you're looking at purchasing one of these companies and they have a UM function, there's sort of an enhanced, in addition to sort of the state by state issues, there's an enhanced sort of diligence recommended.
And as with that sort of closing additional areas, which we wanted to caution to not gloss over in your diligence process, we are coming towards the end of our time here today. So I wanted to thank Josh and Jason Christ and Jason Madden for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to talk and to hear some of the wisdom and experience of you guys and what you're thinking about. And with that, thank you again for being here, and thank you for sharing with our listeners.
Pleasure, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
To recap today's conversation, advances in technology combined with an improved regulatory landscape have made risk-based payments more attractive to both providers and investors. We expect there to be continued interest from both providers and investors in shifting towards risk-based models of compensation in the future. Providers and investors need to be aware of the additional compliance and operational challenges that come with receiving risk-based payments, while not losing sight of the traditional healthcare compliance requirements for fee-for-service providers. Finally, despite the additional compliance and operational hurdles that accompany risk-based payments, providers accepting those payments have the opportunity to drive improved patient outcomes and control overall healthcare costs, while generating financial success for both themselves and their investment partners. Thanks very much for tuning in to Diagnosing Healthcare. We hope you join us again soon.
Thank you for listening to Diagnosing Healthcare. For show notes on today's episode, additional episodes, and more insights on trending issues in healthcare, please visit diagnosinghealthcare.com and be sure to subscribe on your preferred platform. The Employment Law This Week and Diagnosing Healthcare podcasts are presented by Epstein Becker Green, PC. All rights are reserved. This audio recording includes information about legal issues and legal developments. Such materials are for informational purposes only and may not reflect the most current legal developments. These informational materials are not intended and should not be taken as legal advice on any particular set of facts or circumstances, and these materials are not a substitute for the advice of competent counsel. The content reflects the personal views and opinions of the participants. No attorney-client relationship has been created by this audio recording. This audio recording may be considered attorney advertising in some jurisdictions under the applicable law and ethical rules. The determination of the need for legal services and the choice of a lawyer are extremely important decisions and should not be based solely upon advertisements or self-proclaimed expertise. No representation is made that the quality of the legal services to be performed is greater than the quality of legal services performed by other lawyers.